Good evening, good evening. All right, welcome to the next project in the Environments for Animation course. This is going to be Project 6, in which you are taking on landscape and environment design. So this is the Bob Ross project of this semester and this series of projects that we're working on. Congratulations on making it through the infographics. For this project, I've got a previous example that I've done online within my YouTube channel. That is Scatto.org on YouTube. If you type that in, you'll be able to see my previous videos. And there's a lengthy explanation in there about how to be able to get this set up. But, the more you do something, the better you get at it, right? I want to give you some brief tips tonight for what you're going to be hitting with this landscape project, how to be able to approach this, and how to be able to set yourself up for success with all those things that Bob Ross always makes look so easy on his TV show, but this will give you a little bit more insight into it. So you've got a couple things that you are going to be tackling within this project, maybe some new vocabulary to you if you haven't done a whole lot of landscape painting in the past. I generally find that most people, going to art school, spent their high school days drawing characters and working on human anatomy, drawing eyes, hands, poses, characters in clothing, that type of thing, and really getting into the character concept. So when you're asked to do an environment, a landscape painting, this isn't something that when you're sitting in high school with just, pencils and pens that you really sit down and do that much of. It's just not kind of where a lot of the classical art training takes place. However, a lot of those same lessons that you've been learning from your still life projects, from traditional media, are all going to come into play on this next project. From the top here, I want to make sure that you guys are using reference illustrations for this. Please do not use actual photographs of landscapes. They've got entirely too much information in them. And the way that an artist or an illustrator actually goes through and solves for these visual solutions is really important for you guys to study. So please, as you approach these projects, use illustrations, landscape illustrations as your reference point. One of the big things that we're going to be talking about is atmospheric perspective. So there's a video in the discussion or in the module talking about that. Atmospheric perspective is this idea that as things get further away, they lose saturation. There's less blacks, there's less hard whites, and instead they start to move towards this middle gray tone. As things move closer to the foreground, things are become much, much brighter. And we're going to see more harsh whites and we're going to see more dark darks. As we continue to look through various examples today and start to build out this project and we talk through it, you're going to see lots of examples of that. So I want you to keep your eyes on it, keep a lookout for it on how these are being handled. You're going to be painting likely a really nice sky within this project. And the other big part within this is getting some type of ruins. So don't forget the narrative aspect of this course. We still want to be able to tell a story within these paintings. So there needs to be some type of man or some type of structure, something that was built by a sentient group of people somewhere within your scene. And within each one of these three examples that you see, there is some type of building in here. And that is going to be really, really important. It gives us a nice sense of scale. I would say if this is your first time approaching a landscape painting, maybe do not try to paint a castle. A castle looks really cool. It's one of those sort of top of the water sort of ideas that everyone comes up with. But painting stone walls and getting the lighting right, working on those bright colored structures is a little bit trickier than you think it might be, especially making something look big from far away. So another good little tip here as we're getting started is the idea of how detail sort of dissipates as things get further away. It sounds really obvious to say, but there's going to be more detail, more you'll be able to see the flowers and each little individual blade of grass within the foreground. as we move to the middle ground, less detail, and as we move to the far background, be careful not to over detail the far background part. That's something that I used to do in the past, and it always made the work look really, really flat and didn't have that sense of scale and open space that we're really going for within this project. One more tip before I show you guys some more examples here for working with this project is you need to be aiming towards a finished, polished painting here. This means we want to move past there. You can still have loose brush strokes. You can still have a lot of mark making that's going on within your painting, but it needs to feel finalized. There needs to be that sense of polish that's going on within this painting. If you guys turn these in and it still looks like it's sort of in the beginning sketch phase and like you stopped, halfway or, 60% into the painting, you didn't do the project all the way. You didn't take it as far as you possibly can. Let me show you a couple other examples here. So we're going to start getting into the mechanics of what you might be looking for within these paintings. We've got this one, and this one. All right. So we've got 3 different landscape paintings here. Scale this down so we can see all 3 on the screen at the same time. Really like this one over on the left-hand side. I think that his color usage is so unique. All right, so with these 3 on the screen, we just got a rock behind there, not losing anything too much. Yeah, there we go. That'll work. Push this guy up higher and higher. There's pretty much all 3 of them. Okay, cool. So for these 3 paintings, what do they have in common? And this is a great spot for us to begin with these landscape paintings in this environment project. Well, they all have something off really far in the distance. So that idea of atmospheric perspective, of things moving away and the atmosphere kind of taking over and dropping some of that saturation is certainly happening within these paintings. You can see the mountains here on this almost monochromatic painting. As they start to move off, they are not black. We look at the bushes within the foreground here, and that is a really, really close to black that's happening. Whereas these mountains back here in the background are not black. They are moving much closer. There's a lot more relationship color-wise than the color space to the clouds or the exposed sky up here with these mountains than there is to what's going on within the grassy fields that we're seeing. The same thing is occurring within our wrecked pirate ship in the painting with the waterfall here. Is as we look at this hill crest in the background, it's a gray. It is not black. The closest thing that we have to black within this painting is going on with this pile of wood here close within the foreground. Our ship within the middle ground of this painting also does not feature any black on it, and our hues and our saturations are starting to become a lot more gray. So within the world of painting, you can have red grays, you can have green grays, you can have yellow grays, brown grays, etc. That just means anything that doesn't have a whole lot of saturation to it. Okay, so we're starting to define some spaces within this project, right? We've got a foreground, we've got a middle ground, and then we've got a background. You can have more planes than that within your piece. You can have an extreme foreground, you can have a middle ground, a middle background, a background, and then a distant background as well. It's really up to you and how your painting comes together. The third painting that we're looking at within this, we can confirm that it also has those mountainscapes that are happening off in the distance. And those mountainscapes, compared to the rocks within the foreground, you can see how much darker and how much more contrast between the darks and the lights is occurring. These mountains off in the distance still do have shading on them. They still are shaded, but the amount of contrast and separation between the lights and darks is much, much, much less. This is a very soft, very, very atmospheric and beautiful painting that shows scale in a really, really tremendous way. You do not need to add any human figures into these paintings. We want the landscape and the man-made structure within it to tell the story itself, okay? One other thing I want to point out to you guys, some of the neat things that they're doing in here. I think just about each one of the paintings has this in common, but we'll talk about them in tandem with one another. Um, each one of these paintings has got some type of fog or clouds that exist towards the ground. Within the painting of the pirate ship over here on the right-hand side, there's some mist that's going on coming off of the waterfall that's going inside of these trees that's happening really nicely. But we see another cool trick that's going on in our way back mountains right here. You can see that there is a gradient that's occurring from the bottom of the mountain up to the top. It's getting darker, right? So it's lighter down by the horizon line within this piece and getting darker as it moves up to the top. The same thing is happening with the mountains over here on the left-hand side within our big with the painting with the three knights in it. We can see that this mountainscape in between the negative space here gets brighter as it gets towards the bottom and then darker as we move up to the top. This is a really, really great technique that I want you guys to start studying and looking at with how they're handling these paintings, especially within the items within the far background. The third painting, the one that's almost monochromatic here, perhaps does the best job of highlighting that, where we can really, really see these mountains with that sort of low-hanging fog cover off in the distance that's helping to separate the mountains from the top to the bottom. This is probably the loosest of the painting, but it still does a great job working with texture of describing these fields. Next thing I want to be able to point out to you guys, in addition to the fog, is sort of how these paintings are structured. Each one of these three paintings, though they feature fairly different subject matter, different buildings, different lighting, different color schemes, they all work with some cool principles here. So we've got our items in the far background. We've got our middle ground. That's where our three knights are hanging out at. And then we also have got something within the foreground. So in each one of these paintings, down here you can see that there's a small bush within the monochromatic painting. There is a bush that's sort of framing the foreground. Within the one with our pirate ship and the waterfall, we're going to see that there are some rocks, there's some reeds, there's things in there that are helping to frame the viewer's position within the overall painting. I remember I took a trip to Yellowstone National Park, and everything there is just absolutely gorgeous. You drive your car another 400 meters, and it's this beautiful vista, amazing waterfall, one after the other. It just does not stop. So as I'm taking the photographs on this trip to Yellowstone National Park, I got done and I looked at them, and yeah, it was a beautiful picture of a waterfall, but the composition was lacking and it didn't feel like one I would actually want to hang up and print out and put on my wall because I had not framed these photos with anything within the foreground. Look at the big rock structure that you probably didn't even notice on the left-hand side at first of this waterfall and pirate ship painting that's starting to frame the viewer's eye into the section that we actually want to look at. The same thing is happening with this painting. This is perhaps the most obvious one out of the group because we've got these big rock structures that have some kind of old runes written in on them, and they are doing a marvelous job of setting the foreground and framing the rest of the piece. This one right here is an absolute masterpiece. All three of them are successful, but this one, as far as the use of color, the hot spot for where we're focusing the viewer's attention, the framing of the shapes, the overall atmospheric perspective here is just tremendously done. It's a really, really astonishing painting. I also really love within this one, all the detail that the artist put into the ground. So I think that's maybe another good one to be able to talk about with you guys for these paintings is you might end up painting some grass, okay? This is your project to figure out how to be able to take a large plane, right? Like this field that we see here, but breaking it up so that visually with the colors, we're looking at a series of different colors here. There's some dirt spots, there's some other plant life that's going on. Not all the plants are the exact same size. And how is the artist actually breaking up this area? If this is your first time, to do a landscape painting or any kind of environment painting, I would not recommend that you include water into your piece. Just just because it's its own genre of painting. It's got its own series of pitfalls and techniques and things that you need to practice on. And because I've got to give you a grade on this project, sticking to grass is going to work really well for you. Trees are also a great way to be able to frame these different areas. I'm going to show you guys next some of my examples of these projects from previous classes, and then we'll get into structuring the actual sketch and the demo for this evening. The rules of composition and how we are pushing and moving the viewer's eye through a piece still very much exist within landscape and environment design. And this is something that if you go on to do animations, if you're doing graphic design, whatever it is, you always need to be really aware of that on how you are using your shape structure within your scene, excuse me, your shape structure, your contrast, your shadows, your environment, all the things to be able to push the viewer's attention to where it is you want them to look. So in this piece, we're really trying, I believe the artist is really trying to get our attention over on the pirate ship. And there might be, yeah, another building or a series of buildings back here as we get a little bit further away. So it's really inviting you to step further back into this window and this environment they're creating. How are they doing that? Well, the ship's wreckage here that has the highest contrast and the most noise between the black and the highlights is a good indicator of where to begin. This is also one of the brightest areas within the painting, so this is a good spot. Each one of these lines and these shapes is directing you to this section. So if we draw a line with our hand all the way over to the ship, you can see that they line up very, very nicely. When it comes to our rocks and the inherent shapes within the rocks, they're all pointing us to this direction as well. The cliff face, even though it doesn't look like it at first, is cascading down like a staircase, right? So we've got the upper stair, lower stair going down this bush right here. These buildings, all of this is creating a visual triangle, a diagonal line that's pointing us towards this ship. The landscape environment within the background as well is pointing us towards this particular ship. Guess what? The clouds are mimicking what's going on within the rocks, and it's also pointing us towards the ship. This big old piece here, you guessed it, framing us in on this particular region. And it's a really, really smart use. Another device that they're using here is negative space. So we're getting a second dose of small, tight details and high contrast with the other ship masts that are occurring within this shot later on down the line within the focal area. This painting over here on the left-hand side, compositionally, now that we've got an idea of what it is that we're working with, just take a second. I think that you can imagine and start to develop a conversation in your own head about how this composition is working and really appreciate what makes this painting so strong. So we've got a repeating form that's really, really nice, that's receding back into space, that's also moving on that diagonal line. We've got these two forms that are creating the negative space, these two forms that are also creating a negative space, and then our big guy right here in the middle that's giving us that repetition for the large area of negative space. I love all the little birds this guy has included within this illustration as well. I think it's just absolutely lovely. You'll notice this a lot, that they leave the foreground within shadow as if they're coming out of a cave and there's some kind of overhanging shadow that's going on. This is a really nice touch for these landscape paintings as well. Yeah, this is probably one of the weakest ones out of there, but this is still using framing. We've got the road that's coming forward, so we've got a nice line. That might be something that you decide to do within your own painting to draw the viewer where you want to, but I can't stress enough what a smart job they've done with the grass within this basically black and white piece. They also have a really good sense of scale in, the size of the grass blades, the smaller groups of bushes that are happening just over the hill that we're seeing within the foreground. And then we've got the tree line here in the background of pines that's doing a nice job. Learning how to paint trees is going to be an important thing for this next project. Grass, trees, rocks, all really super important. This is the nature wheelhouse project for this course. I like for you guys to do this because this stuff doesn't stop being important. It really helps you work through abstract shapes in a massive way. I like to share this one out because of the way that the rocks are handled here. If you are not an expert at painting rocks, man, I love to paint rocks. It's one of my favorite things in the entire world. And this rock formation here is done really, really nicely. So we can see that as we start to zoom in and get into the rocks here, yeah, the rocks are tan. They're a light colored rock, but that doesn't mean that your highlights or your shadows just need to be one color for this project. I think it's really lovely how this artist has been able to build in all the teals. They've been able to put in this sort of a rosy, sort of a orange red color within here. We've definitely got some purples that are happening. There's some yellows that exist within these rocks. We've got a good amount of moss that's growing on them. You can also put other small bushes and ferns into any of your rocks that you're creating, right? And it turns out really, really nicely. This is an excellent step here with the atmosphere. Remember how we talked about it having some of the mist that's starting to occur. So right here, we've got a lot of contrast. This is getting much darker within the shadow region. Here, we've also got a shadowed region, but because it's a little bit further back within the composition, we've got the light that's getting caught up within the mist and water particles coming off of the waterfall. This shadow is not as dark, whereas this one becomes more dark as it moves further away from that mist that they're creating. And it's just a really, really solid painting. This is one of the reasons why I want you guys to study other illustrators, other artist works, because this is not a photograph of rocks by any means. This is a painting of rocks. And we have got a large collection of stones and boulders, but they have not gone through and painted every little stone and boulder throughout this entire thing. They're letting the detail get filled in by our mind's eye. So this entire section right here has got the impression of having various edges and sides to it. You can see that nice rounded shape on the side of the rock here that still has a little bit of texture that's coming over the edge of it to give us the impression of what it looks like. But the artist isn't going entirely out of their way. This is a really nice rounded section also with some good forms and edges on it and little cracks going on in there. Hasn't gone out of their way to paint every single rock detail within this. I think that this is a really beautiful section down here also. So we've got the flat tabletop of this rock, and it is not just one color. Rather, it has various tones that are built into it. So we've got some brown ochre, we've got some blacks, we've got some grays, we've got some warmish yellows and tans that are happening there. But each one of these lines and the mark making that they're doing feels, even though it's very loose when we zoom in on it, it still feels polished and intentional, and the shape language is very expressive and strong here. I hope by this point within these projects that you're starting to get an idea for what I mean when I say strong and intentional shape language. Essentially, if I was to go in here, let's forget about those reeds, and print out just this little section. I wish I could marquee it so that you could see it, and hang this on a wall and print it out to where it's like it's going to take up the entire space, right? It's going to fill up a hotel lobby. This would still be a successful painting. The reason why it's a successful painting is because there's an energy, there is a rhythm, there is a architecture to the mark making that's happening within each one of these sections. And the more that you can do that within your painting, if you think about abstract expressionism, when you zoom in on these sections, that's what I mean by polished, finished painting. You can see within this section as well, if we look at the same thing, right? This is a very nice collection of mark making. There, the brush strokes are hidden. We've still got some shapes that are appearing within here, and it feels successful. Where things start to break with some of these paintings, and when I say they're still looking too sketchy, is whenever you can look at the painting and you zoom in just a little bit and you see every single brush stroke. They're all round. They're the exact same width and thickness, and it looks like someone took a Crayola marker and pressed at the same intensity with every stroke that they ended up making. And it doesn't feel as strong. It doesn't feel painterly. This is sort of the secret sauce that makes a lot of these paintings feel really successful, vibrant, and alive. Let me show you some of my examples now from this. Alrighty. So the first one I'm going to show you is the same one that's used within the example on D2L. So this was my starting sketch for this painting. It was one of the fastest, loosest starting sketches I had ever really done. I had some really good reference photos that I also included and was showing off when I first displayed this one. We'll see the reference photos here in just a moment. There they go. Let me open this one up full screen so we can talk about it a little bit more in detail. So between these reference photos, you can see that the top right one is absolutely the domineering photo for this particular project. And I really got in there and I studied and pulled with my eyedropper all the colors that are going on in the very background of this piece. There's within my reference image, there is a whole lot of subtle stuff that is happening. There's a beautiful play on the colors. We can see that we've got all types of pastels that are going on within these tree forms. This is something I talk about as well. The shadows have a lot of blueness to them. You can also do the shadows within purple, and it looks really nice. There's some highlights that are happening on the tree that are not just white, but rather they have a few different colors going on the inside of those highlights. And these are all things that I really got in there and started studying and looking at to be able to create my own influence piece from this painting. Compositionally, I really like this negative space on the right-hand side. Now, I know that this is a pretty big departure from what it is that we've been looking at. Up until now, we've been looking at sweeping landscapes. This is a little bit tighter of a scene. However, looking at this reference image, we can still see that all the same elements of that previous project that we talked about are there. So we've got objects within the extreme foreground that have got some of the highest levels of contrast, these little plants down here. We've got a giant tree that they've done a wonderful job of creating scale on within the middle ground. The tree's so big that it's got other little trees growing the heck out of it, right? It's just a massive, massive shape. As we get further back, that idea of atmospheric perspective still absolutely exists, right? So the shadows that are happening on this big tree trunk here within the foreground are super dark. They've got a lot of saturation to them. But as we start to get to the background of this piece, we've got less saturation, less dark shadows. The shadows are starting to be taken over by the blue. We're losing a lot of our detail here. And then as we move to the far, far background, that atmospheric perspective is absolutely taking over. And it's a really, really nice transition into the scale. So that is what I'm starting to build out within this painting right here. So got my tree, working my way through. Whenever I do these paintings, you'll see me do this later on. I usually like to start with the way back, the background, and then work my way towards the foreground. So whatever is off in the far, far distance, I want to start there within my painting when I'm actually blocking in my colors and then work my way forwards. That's going to help me learn a lot about this painting, learn a lot about my colors, learn the color system before I start to move into the foreground stuff that everyone's going to be looking at right away. So you can see that within my shadows and my shading, sorry, trying to get over here to this tree trunk right here, I'm trying to repeat the same thing where I'm not just letting my shadows be one color, but I'm incorporating some other tones and values. I'm getting a little bit of the browns, a little bit of the other colors that are happening within this space. And then here's the final one for this particular painting. Same rules. We can see that the background becomes extremely, extremely light. We've got one of our highest levels of contrast happening within the foreground here. That's helping to frame what it is that's important to the viewer and what it is that I want them to look at. This is my example of the man-made object, probably one of the smallest examples of the man-made object that I've ever done within this painting. It's a little allegorical for something that was going on in my life at the time. But we've got our grass painting that's happening within this, trying to be intentional about my shape and my brush marks that are going on. And you can see how I've gone through, and please try to, if you're going to have any kind of bushes or trees or grass, don't use the brush or the bushes or the trees or the grass brushes for these entire paintings. If you do that, it's going to become extremely obvious and people are going to be able to tell because it's all the same blade of grass, and it will cheapen your artwork I'm saying it now, you guys. I'm sorry, this is a couple minutes into the video. I feel like that could have been something that I led with right at the beginning of this. But yeah, please make sure that you're not using those leaf brushes or the make a tree stamp in Photoshop for this entire project. That is not what we're looking for here. You do need to go in and get detailed and actually paint some of this stuff out. And that's what I'm doing here. So I'm not going through and painting every single leaf, but I'm doing a good job of making enough color variation and enough contrast within the space that it feels like dense bushes. You can see how the leaves dissipate over here on this side. They're not there nearly as much, but we still get the overall idea that this is a big patch of forest that's going on within here. All right, I hope that it gives you some insights and some clues on how to start working through this. I'll show you another one that I did. Let's go through the various steps. So for this one, I was in one of my favorite restaurants in Atlanta, which is called Da Loi 2. It's a pho place. And they had this painting up on the wall that I just, I thought it had a really, really interesting composition to it, with everything being in shadow within the foreground, not really allowing the viewer to be able to see any of the brightness on the ground until you get out into the field behind the character. My final painting does not have a person on an ox or any humans in it, but I like the framing that was happening with the excuse me, with the trees up here on the top, and that is how I'm setting up this painting. So I've got my sketch. I'm going to begin by blocking my colors in and working my way from the background to the middle ground and then the foreground at the very end. And I'm going to keep doing big swipes and passes like that throughout this painting. The thing that I spent the most time on within this painting as I continue to move forward and show you the progress was by far and away this waist-high field of grass. This took me a really long time to be able to get right, and I think that I could have kept on painting this for quite some time longer. So there's my first one, my initial blocking. Here's my second one. You can see that I'm starting to add a lot of color to the ground. And you can see how much the field ended up changing in color between the two. So I've still got my trees that I'm not going to forget about to go in and paint. I added another one of these termite mound looking tents, yurt things to it. It started off yellow, painted over all that yellow, kind of used the yellow as an underpainting. You can still see some of it exist, especially right next to that big wooden sign. And I'm pulling my color scheme directly from this painting over here on the left-hand side. So everything that you see within this painting is built out from this painting over on the left. All right, so here's the next update on this painting. So we start here, haven't touched the foreground really, just got it blocked in. Working my way through the middle ground. After getting the background, you can see that there's just a little bit of change that happens with the background, but not really too much. I'm leaving it there. Now I'm going through and I'm starting to detail out my foreground within this piece. I'm doing that with just a shadow pass right at the beginning. I'm working on the putting in the darks within there, and you can see how much better that road starts to look, right? I'm really, really happy. Still like it with the way that I was able to describe the muddy tracks, right? As if someone had just come by here. The idea for this painting was that this was sort of a roadside tourist attraction that people would come by and visit and pay a couple bucks to be able to go tour the grounds for this unique building style and structure. And yeah, so I'm using the signage, the road to be able to tell the story. Some of the other items over here just to the side, the big structures, right? They've got their, if you ever go to a national park and they tell you which birds are out and which ones are hanging, that's what's going on with these signs right here. Oops. And then this ended up being the final rendering for that particular painting. So you can see that after I got my darks in there within the foreground, I went back and added some highlights and some other bits and pieces to the shading of the ground. That gives it a nice foliage cover without adding entirely too much detail to it. And yeah, just continue to work those termite mound looking shapes. And I think that, yeah, this one turned out pretty successful for still having some loose brushwork without going too over into the details. And, I finally figured out how to be able to get that nice, soft grass shapes going on within the hill within this painting, as well as the tree line off in the background, which turned out pretty cool. So you've got a lot of different options for how you want to approach these pieces. We're just about up to 45 minutes on this project, or on this first video. So I'm going to stop here and I'll create a second video and actually start doing the sketching in the second video now that we're sort of up and running with ideas for this project. I think I've got a few more examples within the ArtStation, but it's just wild. Every one of these paintings that you look at, they're essentially following the same rhythm. We've got a super far off background where mountains are lighter. We've got more saturation within the middle ground. The foreground, we've got some kind of object that are helping to frame the viewer's view in this space. And we've got the area of the most saturation, the most contrast. Here's another example. This one is approaching Thomas Kinkade levels of landscapery with this deep shadow that they're creating over here on the left-hand side, and really doing everything they can to frame this little house and this stream back here for some reason. But yeah, it's a nice sweeping landscape. Here's a flat landscape as well, but it still has that atmospheric perspective that's occurring in it. If you want to do something like this, you're more than welcome to. Please take special note to how these artists and illustrators are rendering their trees, rendering their clouds. So this is just from typing in landscape within ArtStation. Waiting for this one to load. Dominique, look at that. How cool is that, right? So the idea is that we've got a story of the landscape. Without those people there, this is still absolutely telling a story, right? If I was you guys, I would try to avoid, again, castles, doing entire villages. I think you're going to end up biting off a lot more than you really want to. Complex road systems, various fields where, some of it's being used for farming. How to be able to navigate these types of spaces can be rather difficult, and I would not recommend it for these paintings. That's a lovely shot there of a field and how he's navigated with all the different grasses and foliage that's going on. So, when people get into landscape painting, they get into landscape painting. Okay, for now, let's stop this video. And when we come back, I will actually start sketching a little bit. All right, thanks for watching.